when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, within 24 hours it became official that all ham radio activity in the United States would cease, no matter for what, because of the possibility of abuse of ham radio for espionage purposes.
Hi, I'm Martha Wildking, and today is May 24th, 2005. I am here interviewing Jack Klamm, a World War II veteran, and we are in Jack's ham radio room. And I think that it's a very interesting place to conduct an interview because Jack can give us some information about what he did prior to the war in this room and with this equipment, as well as how things changed after World War II broke out. Well, the thing that I find interesting is in the statement which you made to the Bainbridge Island School Board about this situation. You said, "We have failed to recognize what real heroes and war casualties most of our friends and neighbors of Japanese origin really were, and those that survive still bear the scars, both mental and physical. And one of the greatest, or maybe actually the greatest secret of World War II was our ability to read the Japanese diplomatic code and later the Japanese Navy and Army codes." And what I find thought-provoking is that when you moved your friends, the Nishimoris,
yes,
what exactly did you know? Because it was an awful thing to see what was occurring, but what did you know?
Well, I didn't know much of anything about the real reasons. I could guess a little bit. The ability to read the coded messages was a highly kept secret of which I was not aware, and very few people were aware at that time. I did know that Japanese messages are being intercepted, copied, right down at Fort Ward, among other places. It was known as Station S in the chain of intercept stations on the coast in Alaska and Hawaii and even in the Philippines. But what was being done with those messages was highly secret, and it wasn't until long after the war that I learned the extent of their ability to read them. And but I could guess, being in communications, that at least they were doing what they call traffic analysis. They know where they were coming from, and in most cases they could tell where they were going to, because that was an easily read thing on most messages, even if it was done with a simple code, just the address. But we call traffic analysis, just count up the numbers of messages going from here to there, give you some idea of activities, but beyond that I did not actually know anything. And as I mentioned at the time, it was very questionable in my mind about the correctness of moving all these nice people off the island.
Well, now from what I understand, these codes had been deciphered, and the name of the ability to decipher these codes was magic.
Yeah, that was the common term, which is somewhere along the line was applied to our ability and the results of our ability to decipher the Japanese codes. We were able to decipher all but one code, and that was a very complex code called the Flag Officer's Code in the Navy, and it was so complex the Japanese stopped using it after a little while because their own flag officers had trouble decoding it themselves with all the help they had.
Now, in this radio room, I find it interesting because there's a couple things that I'm 56 and I've never seen.
Hi, kiddo, youngster.
But behind us here are some interesting cards, and I wanted you to just explain what these are. These, it says up here, some HF cards, 1933 through 1941.
HF for high frequency.
High frequency,
yeah.
okay, for the ham radio.
Yeah,
right.
well, it's the designation of high frequency is an internationally accepted designation of a portion of the radio spectrum,
Okay.
frequency-wise, and it's the portion of the radio spectrum which is used for worldwide communications without the aid of satellites.
I know that you were a ham radio man before you went into the military. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, I've been a ham radio operator since well, my license was May 19th, 1933. It was when I got my operator's license, and the station license came along a couple of weeks later. And this interest...
That's 1933 up here,
yeah,
right? Okay.
Yeah. And this interest in radio has benefited me throughout my entire life. I'm self-taught, you might say, about a great deal of electronics. And I used to build all my own equipment. And before World War II, the equipment which you now go out and buy at a store, all put together and ready to operate, was almost non-existent. There were a few commercial receivers. I don't know if, well, right towards close to the beginning of the war, there were a few commercial transmitters available, but mostly we designed and built our own stuff from out of the junk box or whatever you want to call it, old salvage radio parts, and this kind of training was just fabulous for us. And so when I went to radio school in the Navy, naturally I graduated at the head of my class. I should.
Yeah,
I knew half the stuff they were teaching before I went in the door. Knew the Morse code, knew a lot about the electronics, and this kept me a step ahead all during the war. So in the war I wound up being chief in charge of electronic maintenance for the whole 13th Naval District, primarily based on my start of self-training as a ham radio operator. And we are in here in what is usually called the ham shack or the radio room, and this piece of equipment over here.
This one here to our left.
Yes, that is obsolete. It is
Why is
circa
that?
about 1950.
Okay.
It would interfere that's a high-powered amplifier,
right.
and it would interfere with TV sets if I fired it up today. In fact, it would need some work on it before it could even be turned on, but I sort of keep it here to look at it.
There's something in here that I want to show the audience here. Excuse me, I'm going to grab it. Is that
Sure.
all right? This is how you, prior to the war and also during the war, would have transmitted code messages?
This is called a telegraph key.
Okay.
And you make dots and dashes with it.
Show me a dot.
Quick. You see
Quick.
the dash, you just hold it 3 times as long.
Can I try?
Sure.
Okay, so dot would be like that.
Yeah, except you don't bounce your hand off.
Okay.
You continue to hold it.
Oh,
and it's a wrist motion.
Okay, so it has to be kind of like playing a violin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
Very much.
So a dot and then a dash would be...
Yeah, just hold it 3 times as long as the dot was. Yeah.
All right. And this was when you talk about the deciphering of the codes and being a radio man, this was what you would have used?
Now deciphering the code, it's hard for people who aren't in it up to their eyebrows to really understand all this. This dots and dashes were used to symbolize letters or numbers or punctuation marks. But to encode a message, you have the letter or number or punctuation mark you send stand for something else.
Oh, give me an example. Like SOS.
Well, okay, if you were going to have an encrypted SOS, it might come out CD1.
Okay.
Something like that. But in the more complex code setups, you have automated machinery, mechanically automated in those days, which the next time it would come out X4F. And the other end would only know how to get that straightened out if they had the identically wired equipment to so that when they would plug in the XRF or whatever it was, it would come out the original letters that were supposed to. And then to complicate things, of course, for us, what finally came out of the decoded message was Japanese. Then we had to translate the Japanese, just to make the cheese more binding, as they say.
But this was the tool, or
but this
one
was a
like
tool,
it,
one like it,
used.
or more likely on the professional operators. Now I'm going to reach over and get something else here, and I'm going to disconnect it and bring it over here. Now this is a semi-automatic telegraph key.
Okay, explain the difference between this one and the...
Well, this one, semi-automatic, if I push it this way, you notice this little arm goes like that?
Yes.
It makes a dot each time it goes over, you see.
Okay, so wait, I push it.
See, look down here, see?
Uh-huh.
See,
yeah.
It's wiggling.
I see.
And it has electrical contact right here.
Okay, got it.
And to make the dashes, each dash is done manually one at a time. So now what you can do, it means if you're going to send, now let's think of the letter D, which is a dash and 2 dots. So or letter B, that's even better one, that's a dash and 3 dots.
All right.
A dash, and then you just push this once, and you let go of it after 3 dots. So you can send faster like that.
Oh, I see.
You don't have to make the individual dots.
The other one was
and the other one you had to make the individual dots. And this has several names: a bug, a speed key, semi-automatic key. And now these were invented real early for old telegraph operators operating the old telegraph on the wires. In fact, this particular instrument, I've traced it by its serial number, and it's just my age. It was built in 1917, and I was born in 1917,
right,
so that makes me at the moment 87. 2 weeks more it'll be 88.
Good.
And so that is I bought this second hand just before Pearl Harbor.
Would this have been more of what you would have seen during wartime?
Yeah. Now, the hand key was used in situations where they didn't have to send very fast. An individual like a radio operator on an airplane, he used a hand key because he would go on the air very often. But you take like for a shore station like at NPC, which was the 13th, is the call letters that were used by the communication center, which was at Fort Ward during most of the war. It was there were several operations at Fort Ward, including communications for 13th Naval District, the headquarters. Now there are a number of fellows there on the circuits to Kodiak, to San Francisco, to Honolulu, and Dutch Harbor, that would spend all day long, all their shift, using one of these, sending piles of messages, because all the administrative work and that was done by radio to overseas places. And so now Vince Wolf, whom you have met, was operating one of these keys. In February he came from the Navy Yard to Fort Ward, and he spent over a year, I think it was, 8 hours a day operating one of these.
That'd be pretty unbelievable. I don't think I could do it for 8 hours a day.
As a ham, early on,
fast enough.
I couldn't afford one of these, so I built one, which I have put away somewhere.
Well, how much would something like that have run?
In those days, they would cost, a new one would cost $25 or $30 even before World War II.
Okay, which would be equivalent to several hundred today?
Yeah, actually they don't cost proportionally that much now. Today it's probably less than $100, right, because you can still buy them. Fiberplex, which made this, still makes them.
Jack, I also want to ask you some questions about what is directly behind us. These cards, as I understand it, are from different ham radio operators from all over the world. Right. Is that correct? And as I said in the beginning, it says some HF, which stands for high frequency, cards, 1933 to 1941. There are 2 here from Japan that I think are worth looking at. Tell me what you can about them, and then I want to ask you a question of what occurred after the war started as far as your ability to use the ham radio.
These cards are called QSL cards. We have a series of Q codes, which each 3-letter Q code stands for an entire sentence or 2, and if you put it could be either a statement or a question. If it's a question, you follow the question mark. This means that you send a lot less dots and dashes to communicate.
Oh, okay.
And QSL means acknowledgement of contact. And these cards, like the Japanese ones there, and
here.
others, there's one, my back is right to one from South Africa, and there's from Germany, and all kinds of places, Belgium.
Even one from Russia, too, I see.
Yes. They're a confirmation, my proof, my boasting stuff that I was able to make a contact with my ham radio station to these other people, and I send them a card too, and we exchange cards to confirm that we have made this contact, because oftentimes we did it with very minimally home-built equipment, and we're pretty proud of it. This is our boasting stuff.
I see. And what can you tell me about this?
Well, these are more of the same. This is just a selected group up here, but these are from, well, no, that patch must be Canadians, because it begins with a BE, which is a prefix for Canada. And they're all, many of them are from places here in the United States, and but that's just a collection from my activities from 1933 until the war put us out of business.
I'm noticing 1 cent postage.
Well, yeah, 1 cent postage, sure.
Big difference, 1 cent versus what we pay today. But now I know that, excuse me, let me put these away. I know that you had told me on December 7th, 1941, when we were attacked, Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese, that all of this ham radio communications changed. What can you tell me about that?
Let me back up a little bit. The changes started in 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland. The federal government issued rules through the Federal Communications Commission that we in the United States could not make ham radio contact with any nation that was at war. The reason is pretty obvious. It's to prevent someone from using ham radio for espionage purposes, for wartime purposes. And so we were limited in the countries we could talk to after Hitler invaded Poland, and of course when he invaded Czechoslovakia, then we could no longer talk to the fellows in Czechoslovakia, and that's the way it went. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, within 24 hours it became official that all ham radio activity in the United States would cease, no matter for what.
So that was just shut down then?
Total shutdown. Again, because of the possibility of abuse of ham radio for espionage purposes. And
which does make good sense.
You know, of course. And in fact, we can still listen, although many hams even took down their antennas so there would be no question, because everybody was alert. If they saw a directional antenna rotating, even if some ham was just listening, they might very well report it to the FBI. Hey, there's somebody doing some radio work there, better check on it. It just made things easier. And of course, a great many of us went into the service.
You did, is that correct?
I was already in the service. I had gone on active duty in March of 1941. And I actually joined the reserves in November of 1940. So the hams provided a tremendous reservoir of trained or partially trained radio operators and radio technicians for the war. And the large number of us were at war fairly soon. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jack Klamm, a veteran of World War II and a resident of Bainbridge Island. And this is the paper I read before the school board on September 9th, 2004, concerning the relocation of Japanese and Japanese Americans at the early part of World War II, specifically those of Bainbridge Island. I graduated from the radio operator school at Fort Ward in July of 1941. Later, I received special liberty from Navy Staff Headquarters, where I was then stationed, to help my friends, the Nishimori family, prepare for relocation. I stayed all night and returned to duty only a few hours before they had to leave. During the last 21 months of the war, I was again stationed at Headquarters 13th Naval District in Seattle as chief in charge of electronic maintenance and was frequently in and out of Fort Ward, including the intercept facility and its code room. My concern and respect for my friends and neighbors of Japanese origin has impelled me to continue to dig for facts concerning their treatment during the war. It is not an easy job to sort out facts from emotions, but my many years of experience as a research engineer has helped me to separate facts from what we would like the facts to be. Up to now, I have avoided public comment on this subject, but with the Bainbridge school system setting up an official curriculum on this subject, I must speak out to help our children get a true picture of history, good or bad, not just what some people would like it to be. Everything I state below as a fact can be verified in official government publications, though much of it was not declassified and made available until 1977. We have failed to recognize what real heroes and war casualties most of our friends and neighbors of Japanese origin really are, and those that survive will bear the scars, both mental and physical. One of the greatest, or maybe actually the greatest secret of World War II was our ability to read the Japanese diplomatic code and later the Japanese Navy and Army code. This permitted us not only to learn much of Japanese activities, but also quite a bit of vital information of Hitler's plans, as he was quite friendly with the Japanese ambassador in Berlin, who dutifully reported to Hitler's plans to Tokyo using that code which we could read. Our code reading ability saved thousands of lives and shortened the war. One of the early revelations of our breaking the diplomatic code was that an extensive Japanese spy network existed all up and down the West Coast, with detailed plans to move the spy headquarters to Mexico when war broke out with the United States. President Roosevelt and his close advisors were faced with the dilemma of how to neutralize the spy activities without revealing that we had information we could only have obtained by reading their communications. The very act of identifying and arresting the spies would tell the Japanese government we were reading their mail, and they would have drastically changed the codes, and we would be many months or years breaking the new ones, and many more soldiers, sailors, and civilians would die. As it was, the Japanese government never did catch on throughout the entire war, and our code reading ability served us again and again. Soon after Pearl Harbor, the President and his security advisors realized they had to solve that spy problem. Details of West Coast ship movements, airplane production, Army and Navy movements, munitions productions, etc. were going almost daily to Japan from their embassies in Mexico and Cuba. A small presidential strategy meeting was held consisting of the President, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, Army Chief of Staff General C. Marshall, Under-Secretary of War Judge Robert Patterson, and possibly one or two others. Not even the Vice President was invited. The decision was not unanimous, but the President decided that the war effort would best be served by relocating all the Japanese and Japanese Americans out of the West Coast military zone and let the world believe it was racially motivated. He knew it was probably illegal, even though the area evacuated was a military zone. All German and Italian nationals were also relocated and officially interned. It all had to be done very rapidly and with little preparation. Executive Order 9066 was issued, and no one outside that small group was told the real reason. So most of those who were involved in carrying out the order believed it was racially motivated, and many, like I, then felt it was wrong. In summary, we had a vital secret, the ability to read Japanese codes which could shorten the war and save many thousands of lives. There were quantities of positive proof of a Japanese-operated espionage ring active on the West Coast. 3. It was vitally important to shut down that espionage ring, but we had to do it without identifying and arresting the individual spies, which would have revealed our ability to read the Japanese encoded messages. 4. Executive Order 9066 was issued, and to protect our most vital secret, the world was allowed to think the relocation was racially motivated. In wartime, commanding officers carry a terrible burden, which is that they must issue orders for action knowing that there will be casualties, individual, human beings, dead and wounded, sometimes their own friends or even family. They also know that they must issue those orders to achieve the final victory with the least number of total casualties, regardless of who those casualties are. Please honor our Japanese and Japanese American friends and neighbors for the real wartime heroes and casualties they are, and particularly because of their degrading experience of not knowing why, but having to assume it was racist. And above all, please tell it straight to our children, so that this time they will get some history as it really happened.
Well, I think that's about it. Jack, is there anything else you want to add that I have forgotten to ask you?
Yes.
What?
I'm still an active ham.
Ah, very good.
And got back on as soon as I could after the war. Oh, that was fun. And how we practically held our breaths, had equipment ready to go, and when we were allowed to get back on the air, which is done in increments. At first, we could only use some very high frequencies, like very similar to the TV, lower TV frequencies for very short-range communication. And then as the military vacated the ham portion of the spectrum, which they used, this is another thing for ham radio. We are, in using it, portions of the radio spectrum for ham radio, we provide the military some space in the spectrum which they can take over in wartime when we would shut down. And this is what happened. A lot of military activity was on the same parts of the radio dial that the hams used to be on. And as they vacated that, we were permitted to come back on the air bit by bit. And oh, what a wonderful feeling that was. What fun.
So the moral to the story is once a ham, always a ham.
Pretty much so, right.